Welcome back to Switchstars. My name's Luke, and today on the channel we're going to be diving into Arcade Game Zone on the Nintendo Switch, a brand new compilation title containing 40 individual minigames, which apparently include 30 faithful reproductions of classic arcade cabinets as well as 10 iconic parlour games. In this video though, we're going to be taking a look at each and every one of these games, attempting to identify the original arcade counterparts to see just how well they've been replicated, and finding out whether or not the game actually delivers on the authentic arcade experience that it promises. So drop a like, subscribe for more Nintendo Switch content, and let's pop some quarters. So the main menu of the game is colourful and cheerful. We get a funky upbeat electronica day, which is fine to start with, but there are 3 tunes in total in the game, one for the menu, one for the parlour games and one for the arcade games, and all 3 begin to get on your tits after a while. Getting into the game modes though, we have 2 of them, the first being the games room containing 10 classic parlour games, and the second the arcade cabinet, which as you'd expect contains all of the arcade games, but we'll kick things off with the parlour games. Now this game mode allows for up to 4 players to play locally. However, if like me you don't have any friends, any open positions will be filled by bots. But be warned, the AI programming really isn't the best in this one, and even if it were, the bots are complete pushovers, so you'll get no real competition from them, and you'll undoubtedly have a better experience playing this one with other humans. Unlike the game's screenshots though, which led me to believe that I would be exploring a 3D arcade environment, selecting each game is actually done from a kind of 3D isometric perspective, and the menu system here is somewhat laggy. But there are 10 parlour games in total, and each one gives you an overview of the controls when you begin it. Up first though we have air hockey, the arcade staple where you whack a puck about and try to score, with the first to 7 goals being the winner. It functions fine for the most part, however as you can see from the footage, the frame rate on the puck is incredibly jittery, making it very hard to follow, though this only appeared to be an issue whilst playing in docked mode. Next we have table football, which isn't your traditional fussball and more of a UFO themed variant where you're able to actually catch the ball and then fire it off towards your opponent's goals. It's not a bad little game and performs much better than air hockey. Our third parlour game is ball hop bowling, or skee ball as it's otherwise known, and the controls in this one are a bit finicky, especially when it comes to applying power to your shots, which requires you to push forward on the thumbstick instead of just holding a button. The game functions fine for the most part though, and my only other complaint is that games aren't played simultaneously and each player has to take the turn to throw 3 balls individually. Basketball is up next, a simple hoop shootout for up to 4 players, with you pressing and holding the A button to apply power. It's okay, but did feel a bit RNG based at times. And then we have darts, a very simple variant on 301 darts, but there's no real aiming going on here. You simply move your dart left and right and then press and hold the A button to apply power. It's really easy to hit treble 20s though, and the computer is absolutely horrendous at it. The game's pool variant isn't too bad to be honest, so far as the basic mechanics go, though again, the controls let it down a little with no real way to make micro adjustments or see how much power you're actually applying to shots. Functionally, it's sound though. But when it comes to the bowling, this minigame appears to be completely broken. You position your shots before once again applying power with a thumbstick, and with very little effort I was able to hit strikes every single time despite me leaving a pin standing with one shot. The computer on the other hand couldn't hit a sausage, and though he definitely knocked down all of the pins on one of his go, it only actually registered as 7, so pin detection is completely screwed it seems. The final 3 parlour games are firstly Rail Shooter, a shooting gallery style game having you aim the on-screen cursors to shoot cutouts of aliens and get as many points as possible, and this one is pretty easy but enjoyable enough, and I appreciate the little switch up at the end where you fight a big alien and have to shoot at coloured spots on him. Then we have Whack-A-Mole, pretty straightforward, whack moles with your hammer to earn the most points and win. Simple, functional, and fun enough to play. And finally, we have NASCAR Race, a very mediocre game which has you hurtling around a track, holding the A button to accelerate and occasionally releasing it on tight corners to avoid derailing yourself. Not a great game and not very fun. So that about does it for the Parlour Games, and all in all, they weren't too bad to be honest. A couple of duds, but I thought the visual aesthetics of them were pretty decent, and for the most part they offered a fun enough time. So let's now get on to the arcade games, and once again I'm not going to talk about the mechanics of these unless there's something significantly different from their original counterparts. But once again we get a simple menu to browse and select them from, and an overview of the controls before we play one. And it's worth noting that all of these arcade games are single player only. To kick things off though, we have Moon Road, a Frogger clone with randomly generated layouts for you to work through, with space related objects and lava replacing the cars and water. Functionally fine, but a bit tight on the hitboxes. Next we have Cyber Snake, which is essentially Snake with a really shitty Microsoft Paint art style, and it's as simple as the original, but frequently fails to detect your inputs if you press them too quickly. But if you're a fan of Snake, you'll be glad to hear that you also get a second version called Python, which is slightly more advanced, giving you a few random wall layouts to dodge around, and also adding wraparound into the mix. The next game is Brick Breaker, a simple Breakout clone, and I was always a fan of Breakout back in the day. But this one features random layouts, a couple of different power-ups, and is relatively simple. And it's also a little too fast for my liking, but still not a bad little version. Aliens Invasion is a Space Invaders clone, which functionally is pretty much identical to the original. It plays fine, but the aliens' projectiles do travel way too fast in my opinion, giving you very little time to react. And Dodge Dogs is a Pac-Man clone with dogs and a weird yellow duck looking character instead of Pac-Man. After playing through a couple of levels though, the arena layout didn't change in this one, and it didn't register my input sometimes, and the enemy AI is also pretty dumb in this one. Stack is basically Tetris and would have been a perfectly adequate clone if it weren't for the fact that you can only rotate your blocks in a clockwise direction, but other than this it functions fine and plays well. Now the next two games, Meteors and Aeroship, are two variants on asteroids, one having your standard asteroids and the second a bunch of UFOs. Both play well and are pretty decent replicas, but the UFO variant is much easier in my opinion. Infinite Pong is Pong and a reasonable clone of the 70s classic, though again paddle movement is a little too sensitive, and this is one that could definitely have included a multiplayer version. Now our next few games are all variants on the Endless Runner genre, so not really replicas of any known arcade machine that I know of, and I've never been a fan of Endless Runners. But first up we have Highway Racer, a game where you race through an alien landscape, switching between one of 3 lanes to avoid other vehicles whilst collecting energy tokens to keep your power topped off for as long as possible. There's also UFO Run, your basic endless runner, having you jump and duck to avoid objects, and finally Infinite Runner, where instead of ducking under objects, you get to shoot them. Sticking with the Endless Runner format, next we have Speed Race, which I believe may be a variant of Konami's Road Fire, but both this and Step on the Gas have you speeding up a highway, dodging vehicles and collecting energy tokens, with the former having a really garish colour palette which definitely puts a strain on the old eyeballs. Bubble Cannon is our next game, a puzzle bobble or bust a move clone which, rather than presenting you with unique puzzles to pop your way through, lays out a random selection of balls to pop which slowly descend towards you, and you simply need to survive for as long as possible. Not a bad little game, but could have done with some puzzles in my opinion. If you like your balls though, Bubble Apocalypse is a Pang or Buster Bros clone which functions fine, but you are able to spam your shoot button in this one, which significantly reduces the difficulty factor. A-Bert is Q-Bert with a miserable looking red alien, but the premise is the same. Colour all of the blocks and avoid the enemies. And Blade Burger 2049 is Burger Time, a game which I never actually played back in the day, but it's pretty enjoyable apart from the fact that getting on and off the ladders can be a real pain in the ass in this one. Now, next up we have 3 versions of Gallagher, though I may be wrong about the first one and it may be a predecessor to that game. But Shooting Star has all of the enemies congregating at the top of the screen before descending towards you, firing off the weapons, whilst Gallifly and Space Emperor on the other hand are more of your classic Gallagher experience, with rows of aliens sweeping the way onto the screen before settling at the top. All of these are functionally fine, but pretty much the same game. Similarly, our next 3 games are all pretty much the same game too, and are all generic shoot 'em ups, so nothing that I can really identify as being specific arcade games. But Wing Commander and Stellar Squad are pretty much identical, having short generic levels, a couple of different enemy types, 1 boss to fight and a single power up which increases your shot count by 1, whilst Wings Offensive adds ground bombs and ground based enemies, just to add a little bit of flavour to the mix. Coming into our last few games then, up next we have Guardian, a Defender clone which, unlike the original, doesn't have a minimap to help you locate enemies, and the enemies themselves give you very little time to react. It's okay, but not great in my opinion. Skyforce is pretty much another endless runner, and I'm not entirely sure what game it's trying to replicate, but it's not very good and you basically have to kill enemies to maintain your energy whilst dodging missiles and the randomly generated terrain. Sky Protector is Missile Defender and a pretty decent clone to be honest. It plays well and is as fun as the original, though it's significantly easier in my opinion. Duel is Joust with an ugly looking frog thing and robot enemies. I never played Joust back in the day, but I've heard good things about it, but the enemy AI in this one is pretty terrible. And finally, we have Caterpillar, a fairly decent Arkanoid clone, though again the difficulty factor isn't quite on par with the original, but it plays well, is enjoyable enough and functions fine. That though is everything, all 40 games, and while admittedly there are quite a few duds in the mix, all in all not a bad selection on offer, and for the price I'd say you're getting a reasonably decent deal here. What I will say though is that although you're getting 40 games here, only 10 of them are actually playable in multiplayer, and it's a shame that they couldn't have added 2-player modes to at least a few of the arcade titles such as Pong. You're also not technically getting 40 games here, or more specifically 30 classic arcade titles, with multiple versions of games and throwaways such as the Endless Runners. And on that note, I'd also say that the claims about these games being faithful replicas of the classics is a little bit unfounded, though there are some decent clones here, which for the most part are functionally identical. Overall though, Arcade Game Zone is a decent little collection of classic arcade titles, and while you can pick up better versions of some of them individually, if you're a fan of arcade games and want them all in one place, then it's a fairly decent pick. That though is it for this review, and hopefully I've given you all the info you need to decide whether or not to take the plunge with it. Let me know what you thought down below though, and while you're at it, show your appreciation with a like. For now though, thanks to the patrons of the channel for their ongoing support, and to you the viewers for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.